In this video, we're going to look at a variant of the Heretic Legion, the Knights of Avarice, building a 700 Ducat beginning of campaign list, and discussing how this variant plays differently from the base version. As usual, these lists are not necessarily a mathematically best option that you can take for all scenarios, but should bring out the strength of the variant while still keeping enough of its flavor. I'm assuming you already know how the base version plays, so won't be going over every unit again, but we'll talk about any units that are different or I haven't already discussed. For this video, as mentioned, we're focusing on the Knights of Avarice, the high investment army which, unlike the Court Seven-Headed Serpent, actually only has 2 units with the elite keyword. This is a greedy variant, with precious metals galore and a high minimum buy-in price for even your basic troopers. Sacrificing fire and shrapnel weapons for some unique gas weaponry solely for the purpose of not risking damage to loot, this variant objectively has willfully taken a difficult road built into it, and we'll discuss the details of that later. Top tier aesthetics, but unfortunately not as effective as its brethren variants. This variant can still put in good work though if you play them well due to their high amount of long-range, armor-piercing attacks and some unique interactions. Greedy to the point of detriment is the name of the game, and this variant exemplifies it well. There's only 2 units left in the Heretic Legion we haven't discussed yet, and we're starting with the Werewolf, which is completely unmodified in this variant, so there will be no addendum to the description like there is with the Anchorite Shrines and the St. Methodius Warband. Werewolf is the Heretic Legion's big, tough, fearsome, non-elite unit that has no customizability like the Anchorite Shrine. For 140 Ducats, you get a pretty intimidating package. Like the Shrine, a level 3 armor unit with tough and fear will always be valuable, as it effectively requires a dedicated response from your opponent to actually kill, allowing you to control board state flow with this threat range alone. Offensively, this unit is melee only, so its Loping Dash passive is exceedingly valuable in combination with its base enhanced movement of 8 inches. Loping Dash gives a monumental +2 dice to dash, meaning that even without a music box in your army, 9 times out of 10 you can cover 16 inches a turn if wanted, and even more if charging. Consequently, you can get into melee very easily, usually a whole turn or 2 earlier than your opponent would normally, which, with the weaponry available to the wolf, likely translates to an extra kill. Now, of course, this does mean that your wolf can very easily become separated from your supporting forces and end up facing your opponent's entire warband by its lonesome, so don't get too greedy, and consider that early on its conceptual threat range is far more valuable than suiciding in, meaning being able to reliably threaten flanks to force your opponent to play around it is a huge selling point. Also, the Loping Dash passive allows the wolf to ignore difficult terrain, which, depending on your board, can range from being useless to being a godsend. As being able to cross terrain in one dash that would take a normal unit 2 entire turns of movement can mess up a lot of defensive play for your opponent, further increasing the wolf's viability as an unconventional flanker. It also works well for catching up to infiltrated commando to help him not die alone. The weaponry available to the wolf is very effective, with its main weapon being an anti-tank hammer without the blood marker penalty. You can pretty confidently use it to kill units such as heavy mechanized infantry, with blood markers drastically increasing its effectiveness. As it ignores armor, normally you'll have a 52% chance of killing whatever you're interested in, Black Grail and Homunculi excluded, with that jumping up to 70% with just 1 blood marker in play. This will echo later with how the Knights of Avarice plays, as they have plenty of armor pen that will significantly increase in effectiveness once blood markers get into play. Its offhand attack is just a great sword, which is still nice for taking out downed or less armored units. Both of these have risky, so beware that your opponent can make you fail your chainsaw mouth attack with some blood markers and immediately end your turn as a result. Lastly, it's important to note that despite having great armor and tough, the wolf does not have any keyword immunity at all, so even the humble grenade will apply significant threat to the wolf, especially once it inevitably goes down. While definitely one of your tankier units, I repeat you do not want him stranded alone fighting the entire enemy warband while your remaining units are too far behind to be useful, with the exception of course being strategic plays such as rushing high value target, objective, or desperate need to draw aggro from other units. Lastly, we'll briefly go over the Wretched. This unit is nearly identical to the Court's Wretched, but with a bonus effect where if they die, one of your elites get a blessing marker. This helps encourage their expendability, and can drastically help plays that rely on successful risky actions such as a dash or puppet strings. These guys are usually just used to fill out your activation numbers when you have a lot of expensive units, as they're dirt cheap but very weak, hitting their attacks less than a third of the time even under the best circumstances. Your best use case for these guys is to objective control, either by just being an unattractive target on point or an inexpensive unit you don't care about rushing into dangerous areas. With the shield cost decrease, these guys can now wield shields, so later in campaigns people will give them a polearm and a shield in order to make them even more annoying to deal with, but unless you've got spare Ducats, usually they're seen with is a trench club. They must be armed, so at minimum it's 26 Ducats for a fieldable unit. Last thing to note though is that, like in the Court, they will leave the warband if they achieve an elite kill or a glorious deed, which, mind you, is still worthwhile if you get it, but is something to remember. Finally, moving on to the variant proper. Looking at their special rules, First off is Worship Mammon, where they have a different campaign patron, but as it's not in the official PDF yet, we'll not talk about it beyond acknowledging its existence. This also comes with the alternative ability for the Heretic Priest, which changes puppet strings into an armor scaling attack, where you get +1 dice to injure for each level of armor the target is wearing. Overall, this is considered worse than puppet strings due to a large loss of flexibility, but does give another ranged attack if you really want it. It's not terrible, but in the majority of cases, the best value you're getting from this is a downed opponent, whereas the popular puppet strings forced retreat tends to perform better. I will note that mathematically speaking, this attack does have a slightly higher chance of killing an armored unit than the sacrificial knife attack, but only if there's no blood markers at all for one to spend, which usually is not the case for these short range abilities. Next rule is extremely important. Mammon's Chosen applies a flat minimum cost to be part of the warband. At 80 ducats, this obviously doesn't hinder anyone besides troopers and the chorister, but it does make the list building slightly awkward as the campaign progresses, since you can basically add only 1 unit per campaign game, with the important exception of Wretched, which you'll really need to make use of to fill out your ranks and awkward cost thresholds. A trooper with armor, shield, polearm, and automatic shotgun comes out to 77 ducats, which you can then just add something to get him over the line. This is the loadout I use for troopers, as it makes them durable and able to actually hit something, but you get a lot more freedom once you start fielding Legionnaires. Corrupt Merchants is a huge boon for this variant, as it allows you to steal items from both New Antioch and Iron Sultanate, not just weapons and not just a singular one. This is one of the main vectors for customizability in this faction, but there are some popular choices. From the Iron Sultanate, the main temptations are the Siege Azael, Wind Ambulant, and Medikit. Siege Azael is a nice choice for some more ranged firepower for the Anointed, but since you can't grab alch ammo, it isn't as good as you see it on the typical Janissary. The Wind Ambulant is just useful movement bonus, which significantly helps out the Priest and Chorister in getting to the front lines to make use of their scary melee powers, but my preference is to grab the Medikit. The ability to remove a blood marker when you're playing few models is genuinely huge, as it means you can more or less negate the activation of one of your opponent's attacks if they score a minor hit, helping mitigate the attack number disadvantage you'll find yourself on in most cases. You can give this to all of your guys except the Werewolf, allowing them to patch themselves and each other up, which can significantly increase the utility of Wretched, as they can now act as medics that your opponent likely doesn't want to waste time killing. From NA, the options tend to boil down to the Heavy Shotgun, Sniper Rifle, and Satchel Charge. Sniper Rifle helps out your troopers and legionnaires by giving them a viable long-range option for engaging in the fight without heavy penalties. It's also expensive enough to make it easy to reach Mammon's Chosen threshold. The Satchel Charge gives your Anointed something to toss for close-range armor pen, much like HMIs and NA. And finally, the Heavy Shotgun gives your melee-oriented Anointed a very powerful shield combo weapon, meaning you can reliably run level 3 armor Anointed, which with your low unit count will help them stay alive much longer, especially in melee ranges. For a spicier choice, I will throw out that Glory Martyrdom pills from NA are also an option, if you want to significantly help your elite survivability without cutting into ducat threshold limits, but they are consumable, so only viable if you see yourself swimming in glory, which this Heretic Legion already has plenty of things to spend glory on. Preserve the Loot is the other defining modifier of this variant. There's a lot of text here, and that's basically because this rule not only removes items, but actually replaces them and modifies an existing unit. Notably, fire and shrapnel weapons are not allowed in this warband, which means a good number of things, flamethrowers, both heavy and normal, are out, hurting one of the best options for normal troopers. Gas grenades are the only grenade we can take, so grenade launchers are out too. And notably, our priest cannot acquire the Blasphemous Staff, meaning he can't get those sweet +1 dice to actions like Puppet Master. These are pretty huge hits, honestly, but we do get a consolation prize of a gas grenade launcher, which honestly is quite useful for providing both ranged armor penetration and blood marker generation. In a similar nature, the Artillery Witch is changed to have a gas-based attack, which acts as a normal gas grenade with indirect hit, but as a heavy gas grenade with direct hit, and by this I mean 2d6 ignore armor like the Heavy Flamer. Now, while these are both fine enough changes, they come burdened with the problem of being attached to the gas keyword, which has objectively the easiest way in the game to get a -1 dice to injure, since a gas mask costs a whopping 5 ducats. While gas masks are less common than combat helmets on units, pretty much any unit that you're going to want to utilize the armor pen feature on is going to take one by game 3 at the latest in my experience. So, you'll have to spend basically an entire extra activation racking up blood markers before they're worthwhile to cash in, which is sort of a problem for a hyper-elite list. At the very least, you'll have great success against fodder units, since they're unlikely to all have gas masks even mid-campaign, and early campaign people spring for helmets before masks in my experience. But if you're playing locally, your opponent is going to out-arms race you potentially as soon as the immediate next game. Spending 30 ducats to severely nerf most of your army is well worth it in the end. The last three rules are simple. Infernal Rivalry bans Death Commandos, Goetic Warlocks makes them ducat purchase rather than glory, with the associated downsides and upsides, and Debtors to Mammon means we do not need to have Wretched worth 80 ducats, which helps of course with filling out lists. On to the special armory items, starting with Tarnished Armor, a set of reinforced armor with inbuilt gas mask and helmet, which by itself would just be a flat discount on said combo, but also has an interesting rule, where if the wearer is out in the open, a model within charging range can only select the wearer as a charge target, allowing the wearer to act as a sort of melee shield. This synergizes with the next item on the list, but even on its own, you're getting a discount even if the ability never triggers, and even then your opponent likely at least somewhat is having to play around this ability. The Standard Mammon is a particularly nasty piece of work. For 25 ducats, you get a standard that has a bonus effect that your opponent must succeed a check to not go down when entering melee with the user. Now, in combination with the Tarnished Armor, you can effectively work as a melee shield, as your opponent is unlikely to want to risk a free downing, so will likely opt to just not engage in melee within the taunt range. Now, this item was straight up made for the Chorister. Chorister has no range stat, primarily carries a one-handed weapon, and most importantly has an aura that applies a -1 dice to your opponent's rolls, which of course includes the roll to not fall down. This means just engaging in melee with the Chorister equipped with the standard comes with the inherent 68% chance of being downed before a melee attack is even involved. Disastrous even for durable units. The Tarnished Armor and Standard Mammon on Chorister combo is the most popular power play in terms of these items. Next is the Golden Calf Altar. As a 20 ducat consumable that doesn't even have an attack associated with it, you're likely not picking these up until later in the game, but they can be extremely useful depending on scenario and map. These guys are a piece of deployable, one-sided, difficult terrain. Heavy means they're realistically only carryable by your anointed, so is this worth it? Answer is extremely map and scenario dependent, as I said. A 6-inch diameter circle of difficult terrain can basically close off an entire lane of travel to your opponent, causing them to have, on average, spending 2 turns crossing it if used this way. So, putting it on the only path to an objective you need to defend can single-handedly win you the game in some circumstances. You can also use this as a melee shield, as charging across difficult terrain can be nearly impossible depending on position and unit. Strategic placement of an altar can completely ruin your opponent's game plan, but at the same time, bad placement is literally just 20 ducats into the void. Lastly, a unique weapon for this variant, an upgraded greatsword. The Coin Hammer is a fairly nice weapon, as it allows you to generate blessing markers for yourself. As you primarily are carrying these on anointed, being able to pump their +1 stat up to a +2 stat can be very valuable for overcoming long-range penalties. More usefully, in my opinion, though, is using these blessing markers defensively, as ideally the anointed you have in melee have an armor value of 3, meaning you want to have these blessing markers available to mitigate actually threatening attacks such as bloodbaths or armor-penetrating attacks. If you're running the heavy shotgun, this blessing marker can be used to insulate your retreat and follow-up attack. We can finally move on to an example list for this warband. This warband variant, as mentioned, can be relatively difficult to list build for at a low ducat threshold value due to their lack of effective low-cost units. While many will swear by the Wretched for their important purpose of activation economy, which is definitely important, I found that early campaign for this warband, you only want to use them to fill awkward ducat values to reach threshold, and that it's better to start strong and in force with your relative power disparity will be the largest. The Knights of Avarice are going to inevitably face a reduction in power as the campaign goes on and gas masks become significantly more ubiquitous, so if you can score lots of victory points early on when you're most effective, it sets you up better in the long term. With that in mind, we've gone hyper elite for this list, totaling only 5 units at exactly 700 ducats. From my experience, your typical starting warband usually has around 7 to 8 units, so even against more elite armies, you'll be likely have fewer units. But if you manage to kill a unit before it has a turn to activate, you can quickly close the activation economy gap. This list does the majority of its killing in melee with relatively consistent long-range support that can quickly pivot to killing as soon as the blood markers get into play. Starting with our leader unit, the Heretic Priest, we've opted for a heavy melee focus, getting reinforced armor, a trench shield, sacrificial knife, gas grenades, gas mask, and infernal brand mark for a total of 173 ducats. In this list, having gas mask on our melee guys is crucial since it gives us a little bit more insulation against friendly fire due to the 3-inch blast on all of our ranged options. Infernal brand mark of course greatly helps our 3 armor unit as they're priority targets for flamethrowers. Our weaponry works in either order, where a grenade into sack knife provides a scary threat due to a natural +2 flat to injury value. A single blood marker means over 50% chance of killing a unit in reinforced armor, which, mind you, you're nearly guaranteed that blood marker due to the grenade ignoring long range and cover penalties, and ignoring armor. If said gas grenade downs the opponent or they don't have a gas mask, meaning you get a +2 dice to injury, we're looking at a 52% chance kills on units in maximum armor. So, entirely self-contained, the priest can effectively deal with any target, even without relying on puppet string success for an extra attack opportunity. In reverse, the sack knife has a very good odds of downing even units in max armor at 42%. Meaning, your follow-up gas grenade after, say, a retreat has a very solid chance of getting its natural -1 dice to injury negated, and then further spending a blood marker actually gives us a +1 dice armor penetrating attack. Very scary for any unit. If they have a gas mask, this just becomes a neutral armor penetrating attack, which is still plenty scary on its own right. We go with puppet strings over the special version simply due to the aforementioned versatility is too much to give up for this very marginal increase in killing effectiveness. But this build does not rely upon puppet strings for success, so feel free to take the variant ability if you want. The Chorister is the actual poster boy for this faction variant. By combining the Standard of Mammon and Tarnished Armor, we get a unit that your opponent really can just not afford to charge around, as due to the Chorister's debuff, your opponent is rolling to avoid going down upon entering melee at -1 dice, which only has a 32% success rate, without even spending any blood markers, which you should in the case, as this roll will effectively render the unit useless, as being down and in the course's radius is a -2 dice penalty to all actions, and due to fear, melee attacking the courser can even be a -3 dice, which would be devastating even to leader units. Once they're down, killing them becomes significantly more likely with the sacrificial knife, as just a +1 dice to injury greatly increases its lethality, as we discussed with the priest. For defensive utility, we give him the Infernal Brand Mark, which gives this unit full insulation from keywords, and an important -1 injury dice to those pesky flamethrowers that circumvent the courser debuffs. Here's where our medikit gets placed, as the Chorister is our squishiest unit, as it is not only is he going to be focus fired, but he only has 2 armor due to lacking a shield. Consequently, being able to heal can crucially keep our unit alive and out of scary range. Also, as the Chorister only has 1 action in most scenarios, giving it the medkit gives it something to do after taking its melee attack, increasing utility even further, especially since he should be somewhere near friendly units. This comes out to 168 ducats. For the non-elites, we've grabbed one of each of the non-troopers. We've grabbed an Anointed for some mid-range firepower, equipped with the gas grenade launcher, which ignores cover, will have reliable shots at 18 inches and neutral out to 36 inches. Blast 3 armor penetration is something any army has to fear. Okay, maybe not Black Rail in this case, but close enough to every army. With the functionality of reliably putting out blood markers onto the board as your lethal melee units close in. And inversely, it can be used to kill any tempting armor targets once some blood markers have been put into play. It also has a sword to give us some melee functionality, but ideally we're not making use of it, coming out to 129 ducats. Alternatively, you can run a heavy shotgun plus trench shield combo Anointed for the same cost, which you definitely should at some point, but for now this list needs some ranged firepower. Speaking of ranged firepower, we managed to fit the Artillery Witch into this list as well. We can afford no equipment at this stage for her, so staying in long range and cover is her only hope for survival, which, with the rest of your warband bearing down, should lose priority target status relatively quickly once units get within charging distances. Unlike the normal Artillery Witch, you don't necessarily want to use her immediately to snipe a problematic unit. Instead, she works as a great finisher. Treat her like a 36-inch heavy flamer. Once you've got blood markers in play, you can reliably take out any unit. Albeit, if they have gas mask, you have to treat her as a 36-inch regular flamethrower, requiring a little bit more setup. The near miss mechanic of the Artillery Witch is actually better in this variant, as even a glancing blow still has armor penetration, which, if you have enough blood markers available, is still very scary, more so than the normal grenade the standard witch attack turns into. Alternatively, if you see a cluster of units without gas mask, you can pretty much cripple an entire group with blood markers for your other units to spend. In this list, there's not a single unit your opponent can feel safe against with even a single blood marker. Of course, as gas masks get more prevalent, she'll feel a power down, but by then you'll have hopefully enough troopers and wretched to make up some extra blood markers, so just 90 ducats for her. Next is simply the Werewolf. No equipment options here, so not much else to say that hasn't already been said earlier. You want to use the Wolf to basically chase down units that the Witch or Anointed failed to kill with their gas attacks, as a single blood marker makes the Chainsaw Mouth exceedingly likely to kill anything. 70% with a single blood marker, 80% with 2. If they have 2 blood markers, it may actually be better to let the chainsaw attack hit normally, as it's still very likely to kill naturally, but then you've got an 80% chance of downing, which with 3 blood markers means you can use Bloodbath with the follow-up attack, which would then come out to a 95% chance kill on unarmored, 92 on standard, 86 on level 2, 80% on level 3. Of course, though, you'll need to follow-up attack, so in most cases, it's still better to go with the Chainsaw Mouth, but just wanted to bring up attention to this play as well, since 2 blood markers can easily come from simply not having gas mask when facing this warband. So in review, this warband basically plays out like a big fire team, where all of your units very effectively function as either a setup or executioner for one of their allies. As you look at the, not officially in the book, patron skills for Avarice, you'll see that this idea is supported by one of the skills flat out giving you fire team access. Basically, play every unit in this warband as though they're wielding a flamethrower of various ranges. You want to make best use of your armor pen and prioritize high value targets or otherwise units that have not activated yet, as you simply do not have the activation economy to spare. One of the upsides of having 5 units is that your opponent needs to kill 3 of them before you start needing to roll morale, which at that point you're probably already nearing loss anyways, and those 3 are tougher to kill than most of their warband if they've gone wide. And if they've gone elite, that means they've likely got lots of armor that you've effectively made useless with your weaponry. One last pass through, we've got a priest at 173 ducats, chorister at 168, anointed at 129, artillery witch at 90, and finally the werewolf at 140. Going forward, you'll want to start filling out your action economy with a mixture of troopers and wretched, with the anointed being added every other game more or less through benching a wretched and some equipment shuffling. Let me know the specific variant you'd like me to look at, and thanks for watching if you made it this far.